Have you
Yeah.
done quite a bit of Zoom calls yet?
Not a lot, probably, less than half a dozen, certainly.
Right.
Yeah. As best I can, I try to steer away from it. If it's a last resort,
Mhm,
business-wise, I'll certainly do that. But, my line of work doesn't call for a lot of it, fortunately.
mhm. Has
Yeah.
it been challenging through the pandemic with your work or your line of work?
Um, yeah, but that's not to imply it hasn't been good, uh, kind of bottom line, if you will,
Right.
or business. The great thing is I'm the captain of my own ship. I'm in charge of my own destiny. I mean, the pandemic certainly hasn't, stopped me from working. Quite the opposite. I'm working more. I've always kept my regular painting hours and studio hours, and the marketing and the packaging, if you will, and the selling of my work has shifted. Um, would I be doing better if the pandemic wasn't here? Probably. Am I doing okay? Yeah, I'm doing okay. So yeah, I can't complain.
Are people looking for, I guess, smaller pieces now for their home offices? Because that's where they're heading now.
Yeah, not necessarily, Zach. I mean, I've been doing this full time for over 35 years, so it's so fluid, and I always try to keep on top of all those things, including size of pieces and so on. But at the end of the day, my work is best on a larger scale for a number of reasons, including I think my subjects, are better on that scale, because they're kind of heroic, a lot of them, the Western images and large herds and so on. Plus, my natural style of painting is more conducive to a larger format. So that said, the size of my work hasn't really impacted in a negative way on placing my work in homes. It's funny because again, generally my work is large. The painting behind me is 72 inches by 42 inches. Most people say, "Oh my goodness, your paintings are so big. They must go into corporate offices and boardrooms." Sure, that's right, but probably honestly, 90% go into homes. Let's don't kid ourselves. Walls hold up the roof, and every home has three feature walls at least. Above the couch, in the dining room, and probably other locations. So and those locations can accommodate a painting behind me or a little smaller. So I've been okay with that.
Paul, do you pick your frames as well, or is it you leave that up to the customer to choose what kind of frame they would like?
Um, yeah, good question. I choose them myself, but certainly allow the customer
Mhm.
to have their input as well if it comes to that. So I'm flexible that way. Most of my paintings have a conventional frame on them, but a lot of them also they're presented in a gallery wrapped presentation, which means you just kind of paint the sides of the canvases just black, so it's kind of contemporary, clean, and frankly, it's less expensive. The price point for those paintings would be a little less because they don't have a frame on them, which is desirable to some clients. And sometimes paintings don't need frames. So it's, just like the painting itself, it's very subjective. But also frames are like a marriage, right? I mean, there has to
Of
be
course.
compatibility. It has to work. Um, so the frame behind me, for example, I got that one custom made. A lot of my pure Western kind of barnwood frames are custom made out of Flagstaff, Arizona. Yeah.
Now, Paul, do you have a picture in your mind of what you're going to paint, or do you go out and take a picture and then say, "I'm going to paint that"?
Yeah, it's more the latter, Zach. It's more, if I could be so bold to speak for most artists and not just visual artists, we kind of record our life experience, right? We live in the world, and we, react, and we hit all different emotions and so on. And then as a painter, I record my life experience through my paintings. So there's a physical, visual document
Mhm.
of my journey. And so that said, my journey changes just like yours. We don't know what's going to happen this afternoon or tomorrow or next year. We kind of plan for or predict, but we kind of react. And so what I do is I record, travel experiences, my love and desire for the West. So I gravitate to ranches and First Nations developments and such. And then I absorb that, take photographs as reference, and go back to my studio and create the work. So, just by virtue of me discussing that, I'm extremely mindful of that. Whatever I put in as a creative person is going to come out in some way, and not necessarily right away. Some paintings that I've done and I anticipate doing, I experienced that event or situation or photo shoot 20 years ago, you know, so it kind of ferments and it kind of takes time and other things kind of get in the way, not in a negative way, but it's also fluid. But honestly, like one painting that I consider, kind of my magnum opus, if you will, my most significant work. I was at a photo shoot in South Dakota, 20 years ago. And I photographed a bunch of these, posse and hombres and outlaws and so on. They were really cool. And I kind of thought about that experience and those references and so on this long. And I finally painted the painting. So, so that's not unusual. But it's also fluid too, Zach. As a artist and kind of small businessman, I got to react to the market and I got to supply demand. As things sell, frankly, and when I get attention on certain paintings, even though I planned on doing other paintings, if I have to supply the demand because those particular paintings sold, then I will do so. And again, that's not a compromise because I love the work and I'm inspired because the paintings are in demand and they're popular. So it's really interesting that way. Even though I have I'm planning, I'm also very flexible as well. And I think that's important.
That's a skill set to have. I mean, especially as an artist, most times I can say for myself, in videography and whatnot, we can get caught up and say, well, it's disturbing the creative space if I continue on this one path. And that, yes, the market wants that, but I want to explore other things. And
Yeah.
this is where I believe I should be. And the market should follow me. How did you know not to be so stubborn in that way?
Well, I was,
Mhm.
no question. And, to be perfectly honest, my bottom line, if you will, probably could have been better over the years
Right.
if I just stuck with what sold, and as attractive and seductive as that is, my primary purpose, equal to running my little business, is to explore and grow as an artist. Every artist wants to do that. So, you want to learn things. And then in the case of a painter, I'll try new subjects and then it's important for me to find a market for them. So yeah, I could have stuck to kind of one thing, if you will, or focus on that. But that, I don't know. I just didn't serve me well. But, again, consistent with, being fluid and flexible, so I've shifted that somewhat. I've landed on a kind of a sweet spot, if you will, in terms of, the type of work I do, the market for it, kind of the price point and all those things coming into play. The actual painting has always changed to a degree, but that sweet spot is well in place. So I'm really focusing on that. When I say that, it's, kind of a specific type of Western image, specific kind of size, the larger size as we discussed earlier. With that, I know what the market demands, based on precedent, based on what has sold in the past, to kind of ask my own question, pricing too, the way I price it, because I've been doing it for such a long time, I price it primarily in accordance to market demand, not necessarily size and so on, even though that factors into a degree. When I first started out, and a lot of artists have done this, it's priced according to size, for the most part. And that's a pretty good system. But then once you're a little more established and you're moving art on a more regular basis, at least in my view, it's demand for a certain piece. So two paintings can be the same size, but one is far more attractive, which yields a higher price point. And so, that's kind of how I operate as well.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. How do you know your self-worth, or how do you know what you're worth?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the toughest thing. You
Yeah.
can value it on, oh, how much paint you put in, or like you said, the canvas size. And on my end, it's how many minutes for the
Yeah.
video. But that's not always what it is.
That's
It's
it.
a lot
You know,
deeper.
oh, you got it, Doug. My primary objective, and to me, the definition of success, at least in my field, is not to be rich and famous,
Mhm.
but it's to do it full time until your last breath, you know?
Mhm.
So I'm not trying to gouge the market and get as much money as I can for every painting. I want to get fair return and have a fair price and be consistent and, operate like a business. But also I want to stay in business, right? I want to make sure the boat keeps on floating, so some paintings yield a little more money, some a little less, but as long as it averages out and allows me to continue to paint, pay the bills, buy the supplies, continue to, grow, and the joy of being an artist, that is my primary objective. So if I could do it to my last breath, I will continue to be a happy man.
And that's a good life,
Yeah,
doing what you love.
sure. And also, a lot of artists, as they don't retire. Ian Tyson still is making music. How old is he? 87, 87,
87, yes, yeah.
yeah, 87, 88, whatever. Robert Bateman, the wildlife artist out of Salt Spring, British Columbia. He just turned 90 years old. On his birthday, he painted. He went to the studio. So, anyone who has a passion like that, and it's not exclusive just to art, but that's a real gift, and then that, I think that allows for longevity in life as well, because among, most important things obviously is love and family and friends, of course, but, one needs things to do and to focus on and challenges. So I embrace that. I just turned 60. I think I'm only getting started. I'm halfway through my career, honestly. I've got 30 years behind me. Hopefully, I got 30 years like Robert Bateman ahead of me. So I'm still kind of getting the hang of this, which is pretty exciting.
One of my dad's favorite artists, I can't remember his name. Oh yes, Michael Kincaid, I think.
Yes. Yep.
The light worker. He does all the light.
Yeah.
He just, there's so many ways to look at art. Is it tough to say this is good art, this is not so good art? How do you know what's good art these days?
I don't know. Nobody knows. And I say that because we all hear about these auctions, right? This painting going for $200 million, and some of them are just weird,
Well, it's
so
just a blue
so what
painting
is
with a
art?
line in it.
There you go. That was the one that the Canadian government bought for $1.8 million 15 years ago. Highly controversial. But you know what? Also, Zach, is like, it's whatever demand is. So credit, and good for these rich people who can afford to buy these pieces that are, maybe really unusual to the rest of us, including artists. But if they could turn it over in 10 years and make a $50 million profit, as bizarre as that is, it's real, So are those pieces that sell for that much good art? I don't know. It was Vincent van Gogh, one of his sunflower paintings, whatever, that really got the art world's attention when it sold at auction for maybe 80 million or something. That was one of a series of maybe half a dozen of those paintings that looked the same. So I'm not saying that to diminish, that series, but it was an okay piece, but there was so much demand, and there still is for his work, largely because of, the angst and the suffering and the mystery of this man who created these images. So that primarily, in his case anyways, resulted in his work being in such demand. He maybe sold one piece in his life, but his demand went up too. So I'm adding that as, there are so many things that go into the value of an object or a painting in this case. And it's not just the aesthetic of the painting, right? It's the provenance of the piece. It's the artist. And let's don't kid ourselves. If the artist has a tragic story or interesting story, there's no question it adds to the value and the attraction of that particular piece. So there are so many moving parts.
Exactly. And well, great question on that, or great answer on that is Tom Thompson, his tragic story. What happened to him
Yeah, you bet.
right on the river and whatnot? What happened to his canoe? So people are fascinated by the group of seven and what they've done.
Yeah.
Especially in Canadian art. So his price just goes up.
Well, there you go. And like the rest of everyone, I too am fascinated when discoveries are made. Somebody buys a piece in a garage sale or something, and it happens to be, a very famous artist. But that supports the position that, aesthetically, it's not a great painting. because somebody was trying to sell for $25. But once you find out what it is and who painted it, then all of a sudden, there goes the price, right? Like the Mona Lisa, I don't know if you've seen it. I mean, I've seen
Oh,
it a few
yes.
times. I've been to the Louvre a few times. Sure, of course, it's a great painting, but it's the most famous painting in the world because of the exposure. I mean, an artist doesn't create a masterpiece. A museum does. You follow me? A museum like the Louvre grabs a painting like Leonardo's, as beautiful as it is, puts it in a room behind bulletproof glass, and it's copied and photographed and so on, like more than any painting in the world,
You know,
and in the history of art. Then everybody's in awe. There's the Mona Lisa. And again, I'm not saying this to diminish the value of it, but all the paintings around it are probably better paintings. But it's the focus on that one piece.
and there's
So
that
it's bizarre.
trifecta, isn't it? Where it's that demand where you're like, well, why are people taking photos of it? Why does it have a bulletproof glass around
Yeah.
it? Well, we got to go see it.
Well, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. People go to the Louvre and stand in line for 3 hours,
Hmm.
almost just to see that one painting. Which is really weird. And in a sense, it's not fair. In a sense, because there's so many other masterpieces that should have more attention as well.
I think they have the correlations and Napoleon's paintings in there, and it's just beautiful. Some of the pieces, how big they are, I just can't get
Yeah.
over the size.
Oh, oh. I mean, I'm with you. And as you can appreciate, somebody who does paint, just to sort of imagine taking on those projects. I mean, the ambition and the skill, but also the logistics. As you mentioned, Zach, I mean, some of them, physically are the size of a house. How does one take that on? Um, and a lot of those masters, I mean, we're talking about them today because of what they've done 5, 6, 7 years ago, but they were just young. I mean, in your 20s,
Like
just,
Rembrandt and all of those
oh,
guys.
there you go. And so many of them suffered and died tragically. Caravaggio died when he was 37, destitute on a beach somewhere. We know about Van Gogh.
Van Gogh, yes.
Rembrandt was flat broke. Just and so on. So yeah, it's compelling, and on so many artists, especially these masters, a lot of them during their day, during their lives, they don't get the kind of attention they should, if you will, and they kind of barely get by. But it's years and often hundreds of years after their lives,
Mhm.
after their death, that they are kind of discovered and their demand goes up.
Yeah.
So we have a 14-year-old daughter, Isabella, and every year I paint her a portrait.
Oh,
So when she was born, my wife Kristen and I decided that I would paint Isabella's portrait as a birthday present for Kristen. And so I've done 14 so far. But I'm raising this act because in a funny way, I say to Isabella, you know what, honey, those paintings will probably be the most valuable of Dad's, when I pass away. But you won't be able to cash in on those in your lifetime.
The-
So maybe your grandkids or something, 100 years down the road or 50 years, maybe those paintings might have some kind of value if my work ever does when I'm deceased. Well, my point being, it doesn't happen right away. If it ever happens, it might happen years down the road.
there's the power of branding, and people don't buy products and services. Most oftentimes, they buy the story, the magic of that person,
Yeah,
and the why.
yeah.
How did you build this brand here in Canada, Paul, over these years? I mean, 35 years. There must have been ups and downs, and it wasn't always a hockey stick, was it? Is it always?
No, no, not at all. One has to pay their dues and work the trenches, and very few people in any discipline are overnight successes.
Mhm.
So you have to grind. Just like in music, for example, we hear a new band and say, where have they been? Well, they've been grinding it out for 25 years, and finally they have the opportunity. So right from the start, Zach, I mean, it was not lost on me that if I want to make a go of this, as a visual artist and not starve and do it full time and so on, I would have to establish some kind of business acumen, to make this thing happen. And a lot of that has to do with branding and marketing and so on. At least half my time is spent on marketing. I don't resent that. I mean, it's a necessary evil to obtain my objective of painting full time for the rest of my life, but it's a real acquired skill. By no means am I an introvert, but I'm happiest when I'm alone in my studio, just doing my thing. Sure, I'm a social guy, whatever, but I'm happiest just doing my thing. Don't bother me. So I'm saying that because despite that, that sense of joy that I feel in that capacity, I do have to be out there and brand and so on. I resisted social media for a long time after it was kind of, became so prominent and powerful. But then, because again, I'm a small businessman, I recognize the power of it, and so now I've really embraced it, and I've embraced it in a big way, in that I don't just kind of post and run. I have to post, and I have to be aware if there's reaction and so on. And I'm also mindful that I'm just scratching the surface with the juggernaut of social media, but I only have so much time in a day,
That's the other thing. You have a
as we
family,
all do.
you have work to do.
Oh, priorities, right? And yes, I can hire somebody, to do that for me, but I still prefer to have that kind of control and so on. So, anyways, so I'm extremely aware that social media primarily is the branding, and that comes down to also having a business plan
Mhm.
and being consistent. When I talk to aspiring artists or colleagues, I bring that to everyone's attention, in the sense that people are watching. Um, we may know things because people contact us or whatever,
Yes.
but 95% of stuff we don't know. And as an artist, people are following us and so on that we're not aware of. So as long as there's good branding, consistency, you're not erratic, all those things have to go into it, because one has to be very careful about that.
It's funny you said
And
that.
also,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
What were you saying? And
Yeah, I was just
also,
going to say on that. Yeah, I was just going to say on that note, Zach. And when one exhibits, uh, you know, you got to be careful with that too, because if people are going to collect your work or buy a painting, there's no question. Let's don't kid ourselves. If they've met you, whenever they look at that painting, they're going to think of you because they met you, right? So you got to do your best to make sure that's a good experience when you meet them, because that could make or break a sale. You don't want to act, or you don't want to fake things, of course not. But you got to be, a decent human being, if you will, or whatever, be whichever way you want. But just make sure that one recognizes the power of that introduction. As a sidebar, the Calgary Stampede is a huge
of
global
course.
juggernaut, as we all know. It includes an exhibition, of course, an art exhibition, of which I've been part of for 18 years. But they estimate 300,000 to 400,000 people go through the art area. Sure, we don't talk to everyone as exhibiting artists, but we talk to a lot of people. And so, yes, we're fatigued and everything else, but if we're not on our game, you shouldn't even be there, because
Mhm.
somebody coming up to you wanting to meet you, is probably hinging on whether they're going to buy a painting or not. So just recognizing, how important that connection is. And, a lot of my best friends today kind of frankly started off being collectors. We kind of had that in common, with the art thing, and then it morphed into great friendships. So it's, like a lot of professions, it could lead to really good friendships as well.
Do you have any artists out there that you're inspired by that are existing or non-existing anymore?
Um, I have always been primarily inspired and influenced by the master paintings and painters, Velázquez and Caravaggio. We touched on some of them. A little more of a contemporary, if you will, painter, 19th century, is John Singer Sargent. So even though I'm aware of current painters, I don't follow anybody per se. I mean, I appreciate and I'm inspired by, and there's not like one or two necessarily. There's a whole bunch. So you know, it's always changing too, because I feel I'm always changing as a person and as an artist. So different artists out there may all of a sudden get my attention that I didn't even pay attention to. For example, a good example of this is the Metropolitan Museum in New York. I've probably been there 15 times, and it's interesting too because it's a permanent collection, and it's rare that they move paintings around. So some paintings that, may have attracted my attention when I first went there, I almost ignore, when I return, because I've moved on to other interests and other paintings that I prefer as well. So I think that's a really good thing because it shows kind of the evolution of me as a person, as an artist as well.
I mean, it's interesting to see the brand you've built over the 35 years. What was your most exciting moment? Like that one painting that you sold and you're like, holy smokes, I've made it. Like it hit you and you're like, all those other years have just, it brought it alive.
Yeah. Boy, great question.
Yeah.
Certainly there are several,
Yes.
but yeah, there's one in particular that really stands out. And it's kind of, in a sense, it's consistent with some of the stuff I already offered. Um, Kind of long story short, the Calgary Stampede, to celebrate the millennium in 2000, of course, they wanted to do something epic. So they established something called the Trail 2000, where they brought their bucking horses and livestock from their ranch in Hanna, just north of Calgary, kind of the old-fashioned way, overland with cowboys, as opposed to bringing them in by a trailer, to the Stampede. And so it was really epic. It was a lot of, it was probably 200 head of horses, a lot of cowboys. So I was on that trail kind of off and on. I didn't ride on it necessarily, but I went there because it was over the course of 5 or 6 days. So I went there to experience it and also take when the herd crossed the Red Deer River. And it was just, epic and just breathtaking. So I thought about that image for 13 years. And I finally had the courage and I felt the skill to paint that painting. It was 60 inches by 80 inches. And I painted it. And then soon after that, I promoted and so on. And relatively soon after I painted it, maybe a couple of months, I sold that painting. I sold it actually to Canadian Pacific Railway. And their headquarters is in Calgary, just off Ogden Road. So that large painting is in the front reception area of Canadian Pacific. And, from a business standpoint, it was an expensive painting. I mean, it was a $50,000 painting. They wanted a bit of a discount, of which I gave them one because I just wanted to make the sale. So all those things really aligned. It was a perfect storm. So it was the experience of that plus, the price point. I kind of got my price and so on. So that was sort of one. There's been a couple of other ones after that, but that was the first, as per your question. And that was when I called that one my magnum opus. There's been two other magnum opuses subsequent to that, but that was the first.
It's funny when you open one can like that or you hit that one milestone, there's this domino effect now in life.
Oh, it's an addiction. Well, it's like a drug, Isaac. I mean, of course, the completion of any painting or any sale, it's a drug, And one thing I always focus on, and frankly, I'm proud of in terms of my abilities, is to kind of spin one painting into more, if you will. When I make a sale or something, I don't look at that as the end of that relationship. I look at it at the beginning, as the beginning, and the actual physical painting. I try to learn from that as well. What did I learn from this image? Can I create a better image similar? Should I make it into a series? What kind of attention has this painting received? And how can I spin that into, more fun and more profit and so on? So, not to be strange, but it's almost like, those are all my kids. I mean, I've done close to 2,000 paintings. They're all my kids. I love them. And I want to, get the most potential out of each one of them for as long as I can go, and that's not compromising the image. Quite frankly, it's the opposite. It's just recognizing potential in that painting or whatever, the opportunity, and trying to maximize it. And because, in artists also, I mean, I look at painters as, kind of working on one big painting their entire life. These are all little tapestries and pieces of it. So you can't really necessarily say it all in one piece. When I symbolically sign the painting, that represents the completion of that painting, and it's the best I can do in that moment in time, and the painting stops in. But it's just part of the whole tapestry of all the paintings that I do as an artist.
How do you know when you're done with that piece? or when
Yeah.
to stop? Because that's
Yeah.
a struggle at times. Oh, just a little more strokes here, or a
Uh,
few
uh,
more.
yeah, another great question, Zach, because every artist goes through that, and again, not just in the visual arts, all artists. For me, anyways, it's when I stare at that painting and I feel there is nothing I can do to improve that painting. And let's put it this way: too, through the execution of a painting, there are always kind of mistakes, if you will, and I call it like crossing bridges. But it's only a mistake if you leave it, right? So you just kind of go through it and you go with the flow and so on. But when a painting is done, and then if I feel there's nothing I can do to improve that painting, then I'll sign it, and that's it. And even if I see something the next day that whatever may not be right, I don't go back into it. I kind of honor and I recognize that that moment in time, and through my career, I've always been meticulous in terms of recording things. So I keep track on how long every painting takes, and I only work on one painting at one time, so it has my full attention. So, for example, if I'm going to start painting after our interview here, and so I'll look at the clock and I'll log that in, and then if I paint 4 hours today, I'll just put 4 on the side of the canvas, and once that painting is done, I'll calculate how much time it took. And I'll put it into my books. I'll put down all those details and so on. So it's honoring that experience and it's honoring that painting. And if and when that painting sells, of course, I record when it sold, how much, who the collector is, and all these things. And I'm naturally pleased that I've always done that because 35 years later, I'm still accessing paintings I did way back then for information. And often people contact me and say, I bought a painting from you in 1992, and maybe they want information or whatever. And more times than not, I have that information. So it's never too early to start recording that stuff.
Has it been interesting to see where your paintings have ended up in
Oh,
certain
absolutely.
places?
Oh, it's a crazy thrill, Zach. It's a thrill and an honor. I mean, if I can do something to enhance one's life just in a small way, I mean, that's a real honor. It almost says more about the person acquiring a painting than the artist painting it. Somebody steps up and says, I like that painting. I want to buy that painting, for in a lot of cases a good price. And I want to put it in my space and look at it 25 times a day for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I'm speaking in generalities, but for the most part, that's pretty accurate. And then I'm going to pass it down to, through the generations. So, it's something, again, I can create, does that for someone. It's a humbling experience. So whether it's a student in a dormitory or a Canadian national or Canadian Pacific company, I don't care, but he's equal because they have one of my pieces and they have a little piece of me, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I love your work. You do a lot of your shadowing is just unbelievable.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, with that, Zach, the shadow is a result of light, right? So in real life and in painting.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, light is one of the most important things, because the light gets the shadows in a painting in terms of the execution of the painting. It establishes volume of objects and figures and horses and so on. It's color, but mainly the shadows, for me anyways, and maybe for you, is the drama, what is in the shadows of life or in a painting, right? So and in my shadows in my paintings, there is stuff in there. It's not just black, there's all kinds of color, there's kind of detail. So what I try to do as a painter is I create an object, an image that attracts one's attention. So they're going to pause for a second or two and look at the piece. But if they're going to take the time to look at the piece, I want them to discover more stuff. I want to make it worth their while to look at the piece. And a lot of that, it's not hidden things, but it's information is in the shadows, and when one discovers that, I would think it's a neat sensation, because that's what images are, aren't they?
Isn't that an analogy of life as well? A lot of
Well, there you
things
go. Oh, absolutely.
are
Yeah,
in our shadows. Yeah.
that's it. And with objects or images, paintings, photographs, they're just triggers, aren't they? They're triggers into the psyche, the soul, the imagination, the history of the viewer. You know, you and I and two other people can stand in front of a painting and say, what it is, and articulate it that way. But what it means to all of us is going to be different, and more times than not, the people who acquire my paintings, it's because of them and their history. It triggers.
Upbringing. Yes.
Oh, you better believe it, And so when they look at that painting, it'll bring out that memory, and that painting might be the catalyst or the trigger for them to have a conversation with a family member or a friend who walks into their home, through my work. So that is really cool,
Yeah. How, like a painting for yourself, how long does it take to create one? Or does it just depend on, like, for example, the one behind you, is that
Yeah.
a 1 week process? And how do you keep the patience? Because you get excited, I just want to get done now. This is so cool,
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been told, I'm a fairly fast painter.
Okay.
A lot of people kind of marvel at my detail, which is fair. And I'm happy about that because there is a lot of detail, generally speaking, but it's not rendered detail. It's more expressed and interpreted detail. So with respect to your question, Zach, time primarily is a direct result of how much detail is in a painting and scale. But even though I have a lot of detail, even in that painting there, it's still very loose, So if somebody says thinks it looks like a photograph, whatever, okay, walk up to it and see the personality of the artist, in this case, through the brushstroke and so on. And it's interesting too, because a lot of people think the highest compliment is that it looks like a photograph, So, respectfully, that's not the objective. The objective is, quite frankly, is opposite. I like to think a painter can elevate a photograph into something even more, with life and texture and interpretation and so on. So again, the way I choose to paint is, realistically, representationally, but also expressively, that I want to put the viewer, I want to put you to work. I want you to finish that painting for yourself. I'm not going to give you every little detail and every little hair because I don't need to. I'm going to give you enough information that you know what it is, but I want you to engage in that painting and I want you to finish it. Well, that's my objective anyways.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yeah, you bet. So getting back to your question too, Zach, I kind of digressed all over the place. That painting behind me, it wouldn't take a week, probably a week at the most. And so, and my painting, the hours I paint in each day, I try to paint every day and as long as I can. But again, I got to do the business stuff and stuff that we talked about earlier first. I usually do that in the mornings. That's why we're having our thing right now in the morning. Thanks for that. But, I paint standing up, and so it's very physical. And it's very emotional. So it's kind of draining. That's not a negative thing. It's an observation. So, 4 or 5 hours painting is enough for me. And I don't work overtime. I'm too old for that. So it's really intense. So saying it took me a week, that represents, 5 hours a day times 5 days, so 25 hours. So, on average, that's kind of how long it takes.
Paul,
But,
what fascinates me is your discipline. I mean, I hear so many artists, they say, well, I work at like 2 a.m. when I'm drunk, and that's when I get the most inspiration, or I'm on these magic mushrooms. Like, you've heard it all. We've all heard all the stories.
I love that. I love hearing that stuff, because it's true, and it helps a lot of artists, with that. As you can appreciate, I've been asked that over the years.
That's what I was going to ask.
You're an artist, you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and attack the canvas.
What are you on, or what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I said, no, I guess maybe I should be accountant or something. I'm very disciplined. And, I get up at the same time, I make breakfast for a little girl, and I read the paper and I do my thing. But then when it's showtime, when I'm in the studio, then I'm all business sort of thing. But, and when it's 5 o'clock, I turn off the taps, literally and figuratively, and that's it. I don't work in the evenings. I don't work weekends unless I have to, but that's it. So I'll give it my all. I'll leave it on the court, if you will. But when it's time to stop, I stop. I can stop cold turkey and just shut it right off. Absolutely.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting that you focus on one painting and say, "I need to get this done before I move on to another painting."
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
our
yeah.
minds can start going like this and this.
Sure. Oh, yeah. And mine does too,
Yeah,
of course, Zach, to a degree, not to a large extent,
yeah.
but to a degree. And, with that too, um, you know, life takes over. In my particular case, I may be starting a painting, I'm working on it, and all of a sudden I got to stop for whatever reason, a good reason or a bad reason. And I may not, be able to return to that painting the following day or the day after. And so, technically, the paint has changed and maybe my flow is changed and so on. But I never abort the painting. I never, discard it. I just resume, because life is part of the medium. Life is part of the whole experience, of creating that piece. So that becomes a provenance perhaps of that painting. I was pulled away for this, that, but now I've returned and here we go. And over my career, yeah, there's been several times, fewer now, but several times that paintings are just not working. But because again, I don't give up, with those paintings that haven't worked or weren't working, sometimes I would just do the most radical thing to it to kind of like slap it in the face, like wake up, give me some life, show me what you want to be. And then sometimes those paintings turn out to be the most magnificent paintings, like honestly, in my view, anyways, because of that. So you're just rolling with it. And again, every artist is a human being. We're all the same. Some days are better than others. Some days you're on, some days you're not. But whether I'm on or not, I still check into work. There's never a perfect time. You just got to show up. So some days I'm on, I'm like a surgeon. I could paint the rim around a cowboy hat in one swoop. Or some days I'm a little more hesitant. So it's a different kind of painting. Like you just kind of honor that experience, and whether you're like no excuses, you just go to work, and you just do your best.
When you have the creative block, do you sometimes seize the day and say, "I've tried everything today"? Maybe sometimes it's better to just walk away for a little bit from the painting and then
Um,
focus on business for a bit and come back maybe down the line? Or do you just sit there and say, "I gotta go through this, go in it"?
it's rare. I'm not saying that never happens, Zach, but it's rare that that happens. But at least I have the luxury of leaving the painting and just doing some other stuff I need to do business wise. So my day is still a successful day in its own way. But no, you know, I never have a creative block. It's like there's 100 paintings haunting me all the time in this moment. There's never enough time, and I don't say this out of frustration at all. I say this out of joy and recognition. But there's 100 paintings in my head that I gotta paint. And they're always moving as well as I mentioned because of my life experience. So there's never that creative block. Not that you were focusing on that, but that's a common thing in the arts. I mean, no way. I mean, it's just, and partially because of that, or as a spin of that, it's not as if I'm erratic and all over the place. I mean, I'm not changing overnight all the time. Of
Right.
course not. I'm committed and I'm sticking to a particular painting as we discussed, or a series. I'm all in until it's done, and then I'll move on to that other series or whatever in due course. But I don't abandon things because I have a whim or something. I mean, of course not.
Well, how do you, or how would someone know your painting other than the Western heritage and what you do? How can you say that's a Paul Van Ginkel right there?
Um, you know, I guess I've said this a few times. Another great question. I don't know that, and I don't have the answer, but I'm happy to report that over the years, a lot of people have said that to me. That I could tell that's one of your paintings, and they've said it also in the context that even though if I'm known for anything, it's my Western work, but
Yes.
that's not all I do. I do a lot of dance
Oh,
themes,
yes.
flamenco, ballet.
Mhm.
I do a lot of First Nations portraits and otherwise. I do a variety of things, figurative work, nudes, and so on.
Speaking of First Nations, you actually have created a piece that's one of your favorite, if I'm not mistaken, of a chief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What was one of your favorite things about that painting, and what brings this Western heritage to you and like, gets that going, makes you tick?
Um, when you say a chief, I'm thinking about 30 chief paintings. So
Oh,
I don't know exactly which one you
you had
were,
talked about it in,
but that doesn't matter.
no, you had talked about it in, frig, a podcast you did with the Canada podcast, I think. You talked about a
Okay.
painting, one of your favorite paintings of all time that you've done. It was,
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I know what you mean.
I think he was a
Yeah,
warrior. Yes.
yeah.
Yes,
I've kept it.
yes,
Yeah.
that's the one. Yeah.
Um, yeah, we could talk about that one specifically, Zach. My wife and I have kept a lot of my paintings over the years. And with that, to digress in a sense, when I finish a painting, um, I sign it and I want to put it into the market, and I have to be proud of it. I mean, of
Mhm.
course I do. But it doesn't mean I want to own it or keep it.
Right.
But every now and then, one comes along that really resonates with me even more so, and I do keep it, at least for a period of time.
Mhm.
One can never say forever, but sometimes I keep that said painting, for 6 months. In other words, I don't put it into the market, put it up for sale. 6 months, maybe, a year or maybe 5 years, or I've got some paintings I painted 25 years ago. Um, so getting back to what that particular chief painting. So that's one of them. It's called In Need of Nothing. It's a
That's the one.
60-inch by 40-inch oil painting of a warrior, but it's so raw and it's so spontaneous and it's so emotional and so moving, at least for me. And the palette, like everything just kind of worked, and it was just really really raw is the main word, I guess. But there was something about the expression of that warrior, and he was kind of in three-quarter view. He wasn't looking at the viewer or
Mhm.
looking at me, but something in his eye just kind of resonated, and that's why partially why I titled it that. And titles are so important. In need of nothing. In other words, this man, this noble, beautiful man, um, he doesn't need anything. He just got it all. It's in his heart. It's in his soul, and you can just sense that.
Mm.
So I wanted that painting. It's like I wanted that painting. It's in our dining room, in my life, in my space, to teach me. It's almost like a shaman, and to give me stability, and I could go to him and look to him. So that's one that just really, really connected with me. I mean, there were many, but that one in particular. The old cliche, if the house is burning, what are you going to grab? Besides people and pets. But that's a painting I would
That's the
grab.
one.
I'd run out on the street with that painting, let the other ones burn, just because of that. But again, Zach, I mean, it's also subjective, because it's such a raw, for lack of a better word, maybe an angry kind of painting in some ways, because it's so dark. It's not. There is some popularity with it because I've posted it, but not a lot. Because it's a real edgy piece. But I don't care about any of that. It just works for me.
Wow. Paul, you grew up
And,
in Manitoba, you went to BC, and now you're back here in
yeah,
Calgary. Where did this Western love come from and this
yeah,
passion for
yeah,
horses? Because when you see your horse paintings, there's a magnitude and force that just pops out, and you're like, wow, that's strength right there of a horse. How does that
yeah,
come out of you?
yeah. Um, yeah, born in Winnipeg in
Yep.
1960, and my family, my parents, my late parents, and my siblings,
Mhm.
four siblings, we all went to the Calgary Stampede. When I was 10 for a summer vacation, um, and then I was hooked. Cowboys and Indians. That was it for me. That was the moment. Seeing the Stampede, of course, but going to the rodeo, going to the Indian village, and so on. And I knew, like, like in retrospect, I knew. I
Mhm.
didn't know, like, in that moment
Right.
necessarily, because I was a 10-year-old kid. But that really changed things. So kind of fast forward, we ended up moving to Calgary in 1973. I was 13. Um, Went to art school and so on, and did all that. And then when it was time to do, choose a subject to paint, it was a slam dunk. I mean, it was Western work. So to do a deeper dive in that, there's just something about the West, and um, to use the term cowboys and Indians. I mean, I know we should be speaking of First Nations and Aboriginal, of course, but just that context. Um, there's just something about just the vibration of that culture,
Yeah.
historically and current, and just the dignity and the calm and the nobility and all those elements, nature, all that just come into play, in both those disciplines. And I want some of that, and for me to explore. those cultures through my work, I'm in there, I'm in there, and it gives that to me. So, that aside, the aesthetic of it, which is the image
Beautiful.
itself,
Yes.
the horses, I mean, my gosh, the horse has changed civilizations through the history of time, and still does. So the symbolism and the significance of that animal historically, let alone the aesthetic, from the wild mane and tail and the muscle groups and the challenge of painting that and capturing the personality of the horse, and maybe, a small filly of foal or colt by itself, or a stampede of 165 horses. It's just that animal. So within that animal, I can just go all over the place, like an abstract stallion or whatever, all over the place. So, I'm not a cowboy. I don't live on a ranch. I don't own horses. Sure, I ride, and sure, I've been to ranches, but one doesn't need to be a cowboy or a cowgirl to love the animal, right? As I do. Hopefully you can sense my passion.
I can definitely
And
sense your passion for horses.
oh,
Yes, it comes.
oh gosh. And then First Nations as well. That's a whole other area. Through painting that subject, I've been privileged to go to bundle transfers and sweats and ceremonies and so on. And I have, chiefs and dignitaries collect my work. And, honestly, there has been some controversy over the years, not a lot, because a white guy is painting First Nations. But I'm not painting native art, Zach. I'm painting art of natives. There's a big difference, So I'm not painting native art because of visions I have and so on, which a lot of that culture has. I'm capturing them in a different genre, in a different way. And so they're in the public, everything's in the public domain. We can all, as artists, be inspired and influenced by them. So, more times than not, of course, my First Nations work has been really well received and well supported, and by the Native community. I can give you a list of significant locations within those tribes that my work is placed, and that's a real extra honor, if you will. Yeah.
One day, Paul, I'll have your work right here.
There you go, man.
Now, do you print, or how does someone get a hold of your work, Paul? How can someone find a way to get a hold of you?
The very best way is through my website,
Okay.
paulvanginkel.com. And I'm saying that, Zach, because if you Google anyone, if you Google me, there's a lot of unauthorized, out of date, inaccurate stuff out there. Some of it is okay and it's good, but it's my website that's best. And even though I'm on all the social media platforms, those two are still kind of limited. So the real deep dive into me and my work is on my website, because it's all my work. There's an archive of works. Not every painting I've ever done is on the site, but there's available paintings. There's a selection of sold paintings that people can look at. And the sold painting category usually inspires commission work. People go there and say, I really like that painting, but it's not available. Can you do one similar for me? And I do that to their specifications. So that's great. But also there's biographical information. There's been, a lot of videos, if you will, and documentaries on me and my work. That's
Amazon Prime has one.
Yeah, there you go. My wife and I designed a marvelous house in Springbank as our home, but also to showcase my work. Cowboy Country did a video on that and so on. So that's on there. We since moved from there.
Oh yeah,
So
I was gonna ask, are you in Springbank still or no?
No, we're in Marwa. Yeah.
I read it was like a 6,000 square foot house in Springbank, right?
Yeah, that was a trip, Zach. I don't know if you want me to touch on that. So in 2004, with 2003, we bought the property. So it was Springbank Hill. It's called the Slope. So it was looking west, and it had an unobstructed 180 view of the mountains. So it was marvelous. Oh, yeah. My wife, Kristen, who's a retired architect, she retired when our daughter Isabella was born 14 years ago. Marvelous architect, primarily a commercial architect, but she did the odd residential home as well. We went down to San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, to buy old Mexican doors and all the furniture, and she incorporated that into our home. So again, it was primarily our home, but hence the size of it. It was also my studio and gallery. And so we hosted 2 or 3 events there with live music, flamenco music and Mexican music. for 7 years. And so that was the model in which I operated, back then. And that was, so they were opening nights, and it was, it was a lot of fun. So, so that, that was one of the ways that I market and package my work as well.
Yeah. I hope you moved before the slopes created the roundabout.
Well, you know what, Zach? I mean, that's bang on, because a lot of people asked us, why are you moving?
Mhm.
There's always a number of reasons why people move, I suspect, as we had a number of reasons, but that was the primary reason. And even though when we bought the property in 2003, we did our due diligence,
Right.
and the ring road was coming at some point, it never came, and it kept on being delayed.
Yeah.
And then finally, it was getting far more traction. I mean, and there was signs in our neighborhood, the ring road is coming. So we actually thought, we better get out of here, because we don't want the ring road, because it would have been right in our backyard. I mean, almost literally. Plus property value would have plummeted and so on.
Yeah.
So we were very fortunate. We sold at fair market value about 6 months before that ring road was approved.
Oh.
So we got out just before the door closed,
Well, right
and
now, Paul, these guys can't even sell, or they're selling for pennies on the dollar.
There you go, man. So we are extremely fortunate. So, do we miss that home? I mean, sure we do,
Yeah.
to an extent. I mean, it's a marvelous place. But you know what? I mean, I look at life as just chapters and stages, and that was one chapter. It was fantastic, but we left for all the good reasons. We weren't forced out. We didn't have to leave. We chose to leave, and we were fortunate we did leave.
Do you love living in the area of Mount Royal now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
It's
It's an older established neighborhood, obviously. Our house was built in 1917. It was updated and renovated, a couple of times.
Yeah.
So it has great character.
super.
But, truth be told, we want to move more west, close to our daughter's school. She goes to a private school on the western edge of the city. So, that might be in the plans the next year or so. But, this is a good place to live.
Thank you so much, though, Paul, for your time today.
Yeah, well, thank you,
Yeah.
Zach. Really appreciate it.